Oh, I've had the fight since I was 5 years old. I haven't had anybody approach me like that since I've been in the music business. But ever since from 5 to 17, I've been going
Fill
through
in the
hell.
blank for me. Today, Mary J Blige is
Was still living where we was living, how we was living. It was a lot.
The world remembers Mary J. Blige as the queen of hip-hop, a once-in-a-lifetime talent with an unforgettable voice, backed by chart-topping hits and countless platinum records. But what people really don't know is that she was a young girl from Yonkers, struggling to survive a tough neighborhood, a fractured family, and her own personal demons.
After years of highs and lows, she's gone from self-destruction to self-love. Her new album is called No More Drama, and as in years past, she tells her story through her music.
Taking substances, heartache, and hurt seemed to haunt her every step of the way. Then there was Diddy, her mentor, her protector, but for some, a figure who may have also played a role in her troubles.
I was a strong woman who had survived a bunch of BS, who was fighting for my marriage, which was in danger.
right,
But nobody knew
right,
but me.
right.
He was with her as she rose to fame, but some believe he was there when everything started to fall apart too. While some think she only watched the chaos unfold, others argue she might have helped hide some of it. Now fans are left wondering, was she ever really innocent? Mary J. Blige grew up in the Schloblom housing projects. It wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a survival zone. G-shots were as frequent as the sound of the streets, DV wasn't a secret, and shattered spirits were more common than broken windows. Mary's mother, Cora Blige, worked tirelessly as a nurse and had an immense love for music. Her home was filled with the powerful sounds of legends like Aretha Franklin, as Cora hoped their strength would seep into her daughters. But Cora had her own battles. To cope with the pain of her broken marriage, she turned to drinking.
I was nervous and I was excited because I knew that I was going to be able to get my family out of the projects. I knew I was going to be able to take my mother, out of that neighborhood, get my siblings out of that neighborhood. And
Mary's father, Thomas Blige, left when she was just a child. A Vietnam War veteran struggling with his own demons, he was a jazz musician, but his music couldn't keep him anchored. He drifted in and out of their lives until one day he was gone for good.
I didn't have any self-confidence. I didn't have any self-love. Everything was hate towards myself. So, how could I have expectations for someone to love anything that I did?
What Mary faced during her lifetime was something that shaped her into who she is today in front of the world. At home, love came with conditions, and affection was hard to come by. But outside, things were even worse. Mary would later share that she never saw a woman in the Schloblom projects who wasn't bruised in some way. She'd walk past women with bruised eyes and lips, and sometimes barefoot, running out of apartments with torn shirts, screaming for help, and no one ever came. Over time, it became just another part of life, something expected. Eventually, Mary stopped being scared when she heard screams at night. The trauma didn't wait until she was an adult. At just 5 years old, Mary faced a traumatic incident at a family friend's house during a party that changed her life forever. That moment shattered her sense of safety before she even had the chance to understand what it meant to feel secure. Mary was touched inappropriately at the age of just 5. Mary said, "I've had the fight since I was 5 years old. I haven't had anyone approach me like that since I've been in the music business. But from 5 to 17, I've been through hell with harassment. So by the time I got into the music business, it was like, don't touch me or I'll kill you."
Well, yes.
oh, I've had the fight since I was 5 years old. I haven't had anybody approach me like that since I've been in the music business. But ever since from 5 to 17, I've been going.
She further explained something that left her fans shocked. She said, "When I was 5 years old, I was M'd. And just, I remember feeling literally right before it happened, I just could not believe that this person was going to do this to me."
I was 5 years old. And just, I remember feeling literally right before it happened, just could not believe this person was going to do this to me.
She kept it all inside for years, silenced by shame and weighed down by guilt, always thinking that it was somehow her fault. That secret grew, silently festering into a wound that never really healed. She started to think she was worthless, that she had nothing to offer, and maybe she even deserved the pain.
My mom had to suffer a lot of physical as well, so as a little girl, I saw her, this little woman.
But there was one place where she could escape, the church. In the gospel choir, Mary found a sense of refuge. Singing became her way of letting go, a release for the pressure she didn't know how to express.
Then that money couldn't buy. It made me feel better. It made me feel good about myself.
During school talent shows, she sang with her eyes shut, not out of shyness, but because it was the only way to fade into the music. At 7, she performed Reunited by Peaches and Herb in front of her school. The audience clapped, but instead of joy, Mary felt exposed. As she got older, she began to shield herself. Baggy jeans, Timberlands, and a backwards cap. She wasn't dressing to fit in with the R&B stars she saw on TV. She was preparing for a journey like none before. Each day, walking through the projects felt like a challenge. You had to keep your guard up, act tough, and stay strong. If you didn't, you could end up getting hurt, robbed, or worse. Mary found herself in fights all the time, sometimes with boys, other times with girls, and even with her own family. It wasn't about defiance, it was about survival. Yet even though the world around her was hardening her, the music always provided a sense of relief, softening something deep within her from a young age. Mary would sing along with her sister, perched on the windowsill, humming through the cracked blinds, turning the sounds of sirens and street noise into her own lullabies. She wasn't thinking about fame, she just wanted to escape.
Ever since I was a little girl, music made me happy. It brought me the most joy out of everything. If I opened my mouth to sing, it just set me free because I just felt like I had something that wasn't from this world. I had something.
Then, in 1988, she unknowingly took her first step out, not through a record deal, but in a karaoke booth at the Galleria Mall in Westchester. It was just meant to be a casual hangout, nothing special. At 17, Mary had recently dropped out of high school, working shifts as a 411 operator, and doing her best to leave behind the ghosts of her past. That day, someone dared her to try the karaoke booth tucked away in a corner of the mall. She was unsure at first, but eventually stepped up, choosing to sing Anita Baker's Caught Up in the Rapture. She pressed the record button and sang, not because she thought anyone would be listening, but because she needed to let it out. Mary's raw, emotional performance in the karaoke booth was never meant to be heard by anyone but herself, yet somehow, that recording made its way into the hands of someone who recognized its potential. It landed with Jeff Redd, an artist at Uptown Records, who passed it along to Andre Harrell, the label's founder. Andre didn't hear a perfectly trained voice, he heard someone who had lived through real pain, someone whose voice was earned, not manufactured. Instead of trying to polish her sound, he was drawn by its authenticity.
I was signed to Uptown as an artist who ended up singing background for Jeff Redd because I was not out yet. I was just waiting to be put out. So while I was waiting and sitting on a shelf for a second,
Mary didn't fit the mold of a typical R&B star. She didn't have the glam or the shiny public persona. What she had was something far more compelling: truth. Uptown didn't roll out the red carpet for her. There was no massive contract or flashy introductions, just an opportunity to grow. She started out in the Artist Development Program, backing up Jeff Redd and doing guest features. Even as she was recording, Mary was still battling her own demons. She had left her past behind, and it followed her into the studio. But music gave her an outlet to express what words couldn't.
Jeff Redd asked me would I sing background on some of his records, and for the first time at the Apollo was with him, singing background. I definitely had something to prove, and that thing I had to prove was
in those early days, Mary didn't know how to act like a star, and frankly, she didn't try to. She showed up in baggy jeans, Timberlands, and a backwards cap, not to fit in with the image, but because that was her. She didn't sing over her pain, she sang through it. That genuine vulnerability made the people at Uptown uncertain about how to market her. She wasn't like the pop stars of the time, and she wasn't what they expected from an R&B artist. But amidst all the confusion, there was one person who saw something, a new intern at Uptown, Sean Puffy Combs, who was determined to create legends and knew Mary had the raw, untapped potential to be one. By the time Sean Puffy Combs entered the picture, Mary's voice had already started turning heads at Uptown Records. He had been watching her quietly from the sidelines. This tough, no-nonsense girl from Yonkers who didn't try to fit into the mold of the typical artist. He didn't approach her like everyone else. He didn't try to change her or mold her into something she wasn't. Instead, he saw her for exactly who she was, raw, unfiltered, and real. He wanted the Mary who wore the Timberlands and didn't care about perfection, who sang with all the pain and honesty that life had thrown her way. To Puffy, her vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was her superpower. He saw the strength in it and believed it could be her ticket to greatness.
in the world was like me. I didn't think the album was going to do anything. People would always say, this album saved my life, which is so scary to me because I was trying to save my own life.
when I was writing it.
Together, they didn't just create songs, they reshaped the sound of an entire genre. Puffy mixed R&B vocals with gritty hip-hop beats, creating a sound that was heavy, bold, and real. Mary wasn't singing over soft, smooth melodies like the artist before her. Her voice echoed with the pulse of the streets she came from, layered over drum loops and bass lines that felt like they were coming straight from the heart of the struggle. It wasn't polished, it was real, and that rawness is what made her unstoppable. When What's the 411 dropped in 1992, it wasn't just an album, it was the birth of something entirely new. By the time Mary J Blige's songs like You Remind Me and Real Love dropped, they weren't just chart toppers, they were powerful statements. This wasn't your typical R&B. It was something deeper, something real. Mary wasn't just a new voice in music, she was a movement. But behind the success, things weren't as smooth. The recording sessions were intense, chaotic, and even Mary was often battling hangovers, dealing with heavy drinking, and struggling through emotional breakdowns during takes. Still, no matter how tough things got, she showed up and poured everything she had into every track.
I just was bouncing, trying to survive, singing for my life, literally, trying to get all this stuff out of me and hoping it got out of me.
Puffy worked her to the limits, but in a way that worked. He didn't want her to be perfect, he wanted her to be real. And that rawness, that pain, that came through loud and clear in her music. What's the 411 was a massive success, selling millions of copies and changing the face of 90s R&B. But it didn't fix the struggles Mary was facing. In fact, it only brought more pressure and made the cracks in her life more obvious. She might have escaped her tough upbringing, but she couldn't escape the pain, the anger, and the ghosts that still haunted her. As Puffy's star rose alongside hers, things started to get even harder. The pressure was on, and it wasn't long before all of it started to catch up with her. Her next album wasn't just going to be about more hits, it was going to be about confronting everything she'd been trying to outrun. While Puffy was instrumental in shaping her career, there was someone else who played a role in breaking her heart. Her collaboration with Keith Sweat on I Don't Want to Do Anything was electric, but there was more to it than just great music. Fans could feel the tension between them, even if it was unspoken. At the time, Keith's group, Jodeci, was making waves with their raw, unpolished sound, combining gospel influences with street slang, and Mary's voice matched that intensity. In the studio, it worked, but behind the scenes, that's where things got complicated. Both Mary and Keith were dealing with their own baggage, Mary with her past, and Keith with his unpredictable energy. Together, they had a powerful but volatile connection. People close to them jokingly compared their relationship to Ike and Tina. And while it seemed like an exaggeration, the drama soon became public and the press began picking up on the tension. It wasn't just chemistry, it was a storm waiting to happen. Things started out like a dream. There were laughs, performances, and the illusion of a power couple taking over the music scene. But behind that spotlight, Mary was quietly unraveling. Old wounds she'd buried deep, feelings of abandonment, the grip of addiction started rising to the surface. What began as partying turned into numbing. The drinks and drugs weren't for fun anymore, they were for a way to escape. Whispers in the industry tell of one chaotic night in Atlanta. Mary, angry and intoxicated, allegedly crashed a party KC was at, barefoot, her hair a mess, shouting uncontrollably. Puff had to pull her aside to calm her down. It was raw, emotional, and a glimpse of how far she'd fallen. She was coming apart, visibly, publicly, and yet somehow she kept showing up for the stage.
Because before I went over to record the London Sessions album, I was going through hell over here in the States. My business was all over the TV. There was all kind of it was so much stuff going on, and I was just very, very alone in that time. And I survived that time where
Her career was taking off. Real Love was a hit. You Remind Me went gold, and she was being crowned the queen of hip-hop soul right before everyone's eyes. But behind the music, Mary was in survival mode. The relationship with KC dragged on, off, and on, messy and painful, through most of the mid-90s. The breaking point? Not a blowout, not a scandal, but an interview in '95, KC asked about marrying her, laughed and brushed it off. No, he said, like it was never serious. Mary was watching, and that moment hit harder than any fight. The fantasy was over.
And I survived that time by learning how to love myself and pulling myself out of it, everything. So the title Strength of a Woman came from actually me understanding my strength as a woman, not from this divorce.
She saw it clearly then. She'd been holding on to someone who was never really holding her back. And worse, she'd tied parts of her career to that illusion. But from that heartbreak came something else, reckoning. Her music began to shift. The lyrics got heavier. The performances cut deeper. What followed was dark. The album was a beautiful storm of pain, a soundtrack of untreated TA and depression. Mary was drinking alone, starting her days with a substance, popping champagne in studios. She brought entire bottles to interviews. Coke blurred into the background of recording sessions. Some studio moments she couldn't even recall. She was in the depths.
Of the same name.
My life is probably my darkest album. At one of the darkest times I've had. Most of the times I was just depressed and didn't want to live.
Mary had spent years trying to outrun her past. She'd buried the pain, the memories of being left behind, the struggle with A, just stuffed it all deep down. But as time went on, that stuff started to resurface. And when it did, it hit hard. The drinking got heavier. The substances weren't fun anymore. They were more like a way to turn the volume down on everything she was feeling. One night, sitting on her bed, she felt something she couldn't explain. Like her soul was trying to leave her body. She cried and begged God not to let her go.
I was ready to die on the My Life album. I was ready to just end it all and move on because I was really down there. I was really calling.
Everyone around her thought the music was genius. Puff praised her work. Fans loved it, but no one really got it. She wasn't creating a vibe. She was documenting a breakdown. And then came Can Do. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't chasing fame. He worked in management, and Mary met him through Queen Latifah's crew. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. He helped her clean up, get focused. She gave him everything, her trust, her love, even her career. He became her manager. It felt like a fresh start. But nothing stays perfect. As the years passed, Mary had grown into a legend. Her voice, her style, her story were everywhere. Meanwhile, Puff had become the guy running Bad Boy, building stars like Biggie and Faith Evans. And Mary? She was there from day one. She wasn't just part of the machine. She was the blueprint. Still, she never talked much about what she saw. People close to her say she was in the room for things that ended up in documentaries, lawsuits, and stories that only come out in whispers. She stayed quiet, not to protect anyone, but maybe just to survive. She carried it all, quietly. You don't come that close to the fire without getting burned. Eventually, the truth about her and KC came out. She didn't spill it for the headlines. She said just enough to breathe. And just when it seemed like she was finally living in peace, things with Can Do crumbled. She filed for divorce, and suddenly, she was back at square one. Broke, heartbroken, and betrayed. Can Do, the man who built his life off her success, asked for 6 figures a month in support. But Mary didn't break. She went on tour, she paid the debts, she kept working. She made new music, got nominated for an Oscar, headlined the Super Bowl.
The divorce stuff came later, which is when the divorce happened. But I was writing this album earlier from the perspective of a woman fighting really, really hard for her.
Because that's who Mary is, no matter how many people tried to write her story for her, she always took the pen back. Mary's life wasn't just a test for her, it was the very thing that shaped her into who she is today. The queen of hip-hop and one of the most beloved artists by fans around the world. Her legacy still shines bright in today's world. Not only did she have a rough childhood, but her adulthood wasn't any easier. Yet, she did what many couldn't. She held herself together, faced the struggle head on, and came out shining even brighter. Because that's how diamonds are made, under pressure. What are your thoughts on her journey and how far she's come? Drop your take in the comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.